tidy whiteys or.
I texted him, and I think I texted Danny too. I'm like, just FYI, I'm going to go casual because it's a special meeting. He goes, me too, I'll be in white shorts and something. I forget what he said. It was in my hotel.
He texted me that. I didn't get that text.
Yeah, I'm like, wish I wouldn't have heard that.
No.
What? He must be looking for a nap.
You might get paid by the hour.
I could use that table. I could use that table.
I don't know if it's story by hour. Maybe it's by hour. No, go ahead.
All right, you ready?
Sorry about that.
Call the roll.
I'll call the meeting to order. Call the roll.
Trustee Fenton.
Here.
Trustee Dodge. Trustee Dodge. Trustee Gira.
Here.
Trustee Rusick.
Here.
Trustee Calandrello.
Here.
Trustee Carroll.
Here.
President Pico.
Here.
Is Jim calling it?
Jim is calling in, so when he calls in,
Okay.
we'll let everyone know. Say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Special meeting, the fiscal year 2018 budget hearing, operating revenue forecasts and estimates and recurring expenditures.
Works for me.
Do we want to wait for Trustee Dodge?
He told me today he was going to send me his. He told me today he was going to send me his the hotel number. He never did, so I'll try him on his cell phone. I guess we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
just get started, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is budget hearing number 2 for fiscal year 2018. Just a quick agenda up on the screen. This is what we would like to get through tonight. As we go through this, we're going to need some direction from the board so that we can go forward to the next steps of the budget process. This is just our schedule. I know it's pretty small, tough to see. Just to kind of give you an idea of where we are. So we're obviously in the column under August, which is the revenue hearing, the public hearing for revenue. So we'll be going through our revenues tonight. The things we'd really like to walk out of here today with would be the board approving our assumptions for revenue and approving the revenue numbers that we present tonight, just like we kind of did last year. And then also, I know at the prior budget hearing that we had talked about the use of the excess fund balance from year to year. So we'd like to make sure that we've got direction on that, as well as direction on the distribution of the target, whether we're going to continue with our practices of past years or whether we want to do it different or not. So we really need to walk out of here tonight with direction on those things so that we can move forward and start formulating the budget. We'll obviously come back with the full operating budget in October when we do the departmental hearings, and we'll come back with the capital side in September for the board to consider. So I know we've had a lot of discussion about this. This is how we calculate what's available from prior year budgets in order to go forward with our upcoming year. So we talk about this excess balance a lot, and we're going to just call it excess fund balance. Keeps it simple. What it is the amount that's available for spending after we set aside all of the board reserves, and it's basically just from operating efficiencies in past years. We've basically collected more revenues than we've spent in past years, and we roll that amount forward from year to year. So for 2016, at the end of 2016, after we had our audit completed, we had an audited board reserve amount of the $31 million. And then we had an audited excess fund balance over and above our reserves of the 4.1 that you see up there. If we add in forecasted revenues for 17 and we take out budgeted expenditures for 17 and we take out the required reserves for 17, that leaves us with approximately $784,000 of excess fund balance that we're able to utilize to help fund our 2018 budget. So as we go through the targets tonight, or we go through the fixed costs that we have, we've made the assumption that we'll be using that excess fund balance as part of the 18 budget. But if the board would like to discuss that, or if the thoughts are different, that's, like I said, one of the things we'd like to get out of tonight.
So one of my points on this, we've talked about this before, is we have about, between the excess reserve funds that we had available, plus the change in the required reserves, there's about $9 million there roughly that we used with our revenues and expenditures this year. I think going forward, we should be looking at these excess fund balances as something that we use for capital, not for operations. So certainly we should use it, but we should use it for capital projects, not for ongoing operations, because if those excess fund balances don't exist in the future, we're going to have big operational issues that we'll have to deal with. So with that said, too, something that I think would be a good idea is any operating savings that we can identify department by department, we should allow the departments to consider using for some of their capital projects and let them prioritize that, which would incentivize them actually to find some operational savings.
So, one comment I had, and what was that, what did we start 2017 with? What was our excess fund balance that we started 2017 with? Do you know? I mean, I think you made the comment that this is the smallest amount we've started with.
Right, but that's not what we started our 16 budget with, because that's an audited number.
No.
So I thought we did that
Well, no,
spreadsheet of
that's-
what we
that's
started the
after
prior
we-
years with. Didn't you jot those down?
I don't know.
You didn't have, no. I don't know the exact amount. I want to say it was approximately $3.1 million, or close to that amount, that we started
2017.
doing the 2017 budget with audited numbers from 15.
Correct, right. I
Yes.
understand we used the previous year's
Oh, it was
number.
3.5.
3.5, okay. And you made the comment this is the smallest amount.
This is the smallest it's been since probably 2010, when we took the drastic hit in a lot of our revenues. So if that's the board's choice or decision, we can go forward that way. It'll change our presentation a little bit going forward, but we'll just factor that in.
Is-
It's a policy change. It's fine if that's what the board chooses, but that's something that we kind of have to know to be able to go forward.
And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable making that decision right now.
Okay.
Without some of the presentation.
That's
and
fine.
Hearing some things. I don't know about anyone else. But, let me, hold on thing. Is that in your revenue? Is it in the revenue sheet that we see? The PDF that's on here with all the operating revenues? It's in there?
That number?
Yeah.
No, because that's not considered revenue. So the
Okay.
operating revenues that you have are strictly the revenues that we're
That
going to
are-
receive in 2018.
Okay, all right. All right.
So this is just cash in the bank at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the budget process.
Okay.
And I think, as we discussed, that making this change in 1 year may be a big leap in 1 year. But I think by asking the question, we force ourselves to ask the tough questions and figure out where we need to make some decisions, and where we have to decide, okay, we can't get all the way there in the first year. But on an ongoing basis, if this number keeps shrinking, it's going to be a challenge to continue. We can't continue to operate that way.
Yeah, and we've talked through that before when we do our 5-year financial plan, or long-term financial plan that we show to the board. We've kind of seen that trend occurring as our revenues grow at a certain rate and our spending grows a little bit higher on the operating side. We've seen that trend. So this just kind of shows you that those long-term financial plans that we put together, this is really what you saw in those.
Trustee Fenton?
Henry, in your budgeted expenditures, did you allocate the money that the state's now going to charge us for their administrative fees?
Yeah, so that's, the 2% administrative fee is just on the home rule sales tax. It's not on our regular sales tax. So since this is operating revenue, we'll talk about that when we get to our capital budget and our capital revenue hearing. they're not charging that administrative charge on the regular 1% sales tax.
Oh, okay.
It's just on the home rule.
But did you figure that in when
We
you got
did,
to?
absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Calendro.
I think we definitely should have a extensive conversation about if we should use the excess fund balance. But, I mean, why don't we go through the numbers and see what the numbers are looking like? And then maybe at the end of that, this is my suggestion. You're the chairman, Mr. Chairman, but maybe we can just see where we're at with the numbers and if we see how we need it, we don't need it, and we can have that
That's a good
discussion.
idea.
Maybe we should do it that way. Just offering.
Okay, so we'll just kind of continue on. Okay, so I just was going to kind of go through some of our major revenue sources that we have, and then we'll have a slide that just shows kind of our total operating revenues. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the larger revenue sources that we have. We attached to on your iPads, you have an attachment that shows every line item of revenue in the operating budget. So if there's any questions on any of that, obviously we can answer those. Just one of the assumptions that we're making now, it doesn't mean that it'll be carried throughout the budget process, is that our property tax levy will remain the same. We will not change the overall dollar amount of the levy. The distribution of it changes a little bit because we actually retired a series of debt service, a series of bonds, so we don't have that debt service on it anymore. So we're able to move that levy up to our corporate levy because our debt service levy is a little bit less. So this just kind of shows you the distribution of it. Obviously, the largest portion is for our debt service, although we abate the levy on a lot of our bond issues. So this is probably about half of our total debt service. Police pension, we've got IMRF in there, FICA, recreation and parks, and then general corporate. Recreation and parks varies every year depending on their operating expenses, because as you know, the board had approved the policy of the subsidy of 50% of expenditures for the recreation fund from the general fund. So the difference is the property tax levy.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Rizek.
can I ask a question? When was the last time we raised our levy, property tax levy?
This will be the seventh year in a row, seventh year in a row that we have a flat levy. So that's
Which is
extraordinary.
incredible.
Yes, it is.
It's
It really
absolutely
is.
incredible.
Without
I mean-
raising any other revenue sources.
And I am all about,
Through the recession, too.
right, I am all about finding efficiencies and savings. But I think you found them because we haven't raised the levy. So I think we've been finding those year after year
Yep.
in order to not raise the levy. So, okay.
Okay.
Anne Marie? I'm sorry,
Oh,
Mr. Chairman.
sorry.
To your-
Trustee Calendro.
Thank you. To your knowledge, has any other local government kept a levy flat for that long?
You know, I don't honestly know off the top of my head, but I would be extremely surprised to see that municipalities all around us have been able to keep their levy flat for all these years. We can do that research, absolutely, and bring that back to the board, but I would be surprised.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I had to have to look at the name of it, but they had the food and beverage, the transfer tax, they had a long list of all the other taxes.
And we don't have any of those revenue services at this time.
Nope.
And none of them are proposed in your,
None of them are, yeah, we'll get to that. Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So just kind of, like I said, just high level, our sales tax forecast, we are being extremely conservative on it. Our 2017 numbers to date, while we only have 4 months worth of collections because the state is 3 months behind on distributing sales tax, we are down, I believe, about 4% as compared to the 2017 budget as well as the 2016 actual. So going forward, just given the trend to online sales, indices that we look at, just our current trend, we are being conservative and we're pretty much budgeting for a flat sales tax revenue. So our 2017 projection and 2018 budget is equal to our collections in 2016. As we go through the budget process, that will probably change. Hopefully, we see an upward trend in our 2017 collections, and if we do, then we'll modify our 2018 forecast. But for now, just based upon the 4 months of data that we have and seeing that negative trend, we were pretty conservative with it. Estimates for our other state shared revenues, every year we utilize the Illinois Municipal League per capita rates that are published. Probably every municipality in the state of Illinois uses those rates to formulate their state shared revenues. Income tax, I've got the per capita amounts up there for the three of those. The income tax, while there was a 10% reduction in the amount that would be distributed to municipalities, there's going to be additional deposits into the LGDF because they're going to speed up their process. So we should see an additional month of collections in 2018, which is why we didn't reduce the budget. So even though they're going to reduce it overall by 10, by having that additional month or two they're estimating, we probably won't see that decline.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Euro.
and am I mistaken, didn't they increase the motor fuel tax down in Springfield in the new budget? I
don't-
thought they
the
did,
motor fuel?
but it was like a background, not at the pump, from the supplier to the distributors.
They increased the tax 5 cents a gallon. I don't know that any of that's being shared.
Yeah, I don't think it
Pretty sure
is.
it's not.
Silly me.
Just like the income tax increase, they're not sharing the increase.
Yeah, okay, never mind. I should have known
They're
better.
sharing the income tax increase.
But we'll double check that for sure. Want to keep going? Once again, our budget that we're presenting has no new revenue sources in it. None of our home rule revenue sources. Sarah just mentioned a bunch of them: food and beverage, amusement tax. We don't transfer tax. We don't have any of those. We don't have any of the utility taxes. And the budget that we're proposing today does not include any new revenue source. We don't have any debt proceeds as a revenue source, so we'll be cash funding, obviously, our total operations. There's no line of credit, no bond proceeds included. Our development-related fees, we work really closely with development services to come up with their revenues for the budget year. We look at the developments that they're forecasting. We work with them. We sometimes reduce them based upon thinking maybe they're a little bit too high. For 2018, it is based on 72 new single-family, 29 townhomes, and 9 larger commercial developments. So that seems fair. Like I said, we reviewed it with Director Freiling at length and got into a lot of detail. So we're pretty comfortable with that projection. Recreation program fees, as we do every single year, as Recreation comes up with their programs, they look at the fees, they make sure that they're going to cover the cost of services, and they look at the programs that are not successful or not generating revenue, and oftentimes they won't renew that program for the coming year. The analyst in my department goes through them at length with the Recreation Department to come up with the individual fees and the total by programs, recreation, pool, and sportsplex. So this is just kind of a picture of our total operating revenues for 2018. You can kind of see how they compare to 2017. There's a few differences that we could note. I talked about the sales tax already, that because of the trend in 2017, we're going to keep it flat. I truly do believe that that will change as we go through the budget process, but just to start, we wanted to leave it there just because of the current trend. You see a property tax increase, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's due to the fact that one of our debt service funds has matured, and we no longer have to levy for those debt service payments. So if we're keeping our levy consistent, that rolls back into our corporate levy, which is where it would have been before we issued those bonds. We have a slight increase in income tax and use tax. You see a large decline in licenses, and that's because this year was a vehicle sticker year, and 2018 won't be. So those are every other year, so that's why you see that decline. We've got a slight increase, like I talked about, with development service fees, and then also in our fine category, we have a slight increase that was estimated. So this is the $55,331,684. That is our operating revenues. We consider operating to be the general fund, the recreation fund, and the civic center fund. So we add all those together, and we look at them as a group because the general fund subsidizes the recreation function as well as the civic center. Any questions? So this is really kind of the end of revenue. It's very high level. I know we talked about it at length at our first budget hearing, kind of some of our assumptions that we make when calculating revenues. We did provide you with the line item budget attached, as an attachment on your iPad, so if tonight or at any time between now and our next budget hearing, there's any questions or concerns about any of the line items, just let us know. We will be going through them throughout the budget process. Sarah had just made note of our pool revenues seem to be a little bit lower currently than what we had trended, so we're going to relook at those. What was the other one that you mentioned? Oh, the Civic Center revenue, that also seems like it's a little bit higher than what we trended for 2017, so we'll obviously modify that one. So we don't just produce this today and stop looking at it. We'll revise those revenues all throughout the budget process until we pass it in December.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Ruzick?
does this, do these assumptions assume that all of our fees stay the same in terms of like, you know,
Yes.
Yep.
fines and?
Yes, we
Okay.
didn't, we don't have any increases factored in here. We have some thoughts on that, and we'll bring those forward as part of the departmental budget hearings. When the departments come and present their budget, present any operating efficiencies that they've identified. We'll also talk about some current revenue sources that we have that maybe we could increase fees or do something with them in order to produce a little bit of revenue. But we'll bring those forward later.
So with everything staying the same, we're projecting $500,000 higher in revenue. And
Yep.
does that take into consideration the fact that there's no debt proceeds in this year?
Yep, yep,
Okay.
yep, absolutely.
So overall, I'd say that's good news. Now,
Yeah, and I
until
think
we
the
get to the
sales tax-
expenditure side near the
Yeah,
bankers.
well, yeah, and I do, like I said, I do think the sales tax number is going to change. I'm hoping that we're going to see a little bit of an upward trend. We had a rough start to the year, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. April was a little bit higher than January, February, and March was, so hopefully we'll continue to see that uptick. So, okay. Okay, so if you remember at our last budget hearing, we had a really long discussion about how we calculate what we call the target amount that we distribute to the various departments. So what we have always historically done is we take that excess fund balance from the prior year, we add in revenues, we take out expenses, fixed costs, what we had historically considered fixed costs, and we come up with what we called a target amount. That target amount, we would determine an amount, and it would be distributed to the departments so that they could come up with their variable operating budget, and then they would bring their full budget to the board and present it to the board. Usually we had some excess funds available after we distributed the target, and that's what the board would be able to utilize to fund discretionary expenditures that were brought forward. And those would be expenditures that the departments were not able to fit into their target, or they were new expenditures such as a new position, a new program within a department, and the board would have those discretionary funds available to make decisions on what would be funded. So what we did this year is we took all those fixed expenses and we categorized them. And this is just staff's categorization. It doesn't mean it has to stay this way or this is the way we need to look at it. But we looked at it as those operating costs that we felt truly were fixed. The majority of them are staff-related.
And I'm sorry, Trustee Dodge is ready to get on, so before we get, I know this was...
Picks up, I'm gonna say motion to adjourn.
You don't want to check his dress code.
I don't even want that
Your
picture.
call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system.
Guess he's gonna miss the meeting.
This is James.
Trustee Dodge,
Hey, Joe.
could you hear us okay?
I can.
All right, Anne Marie is just starting to go into the recurring fixed expenditures right now. So
Joe.
I'm gonna,
And to the clerk, trustee Dodge has just joined the meeting.
so,
Okay, we good?
yeah.
Okay.
All right, all right. So-
Okay, so as I was saying at the last meeting, we kind of talked a lot about this. So staff took the opportunity to categorize them into different categories. So we have what we are calling our core fixed operating expenses. It's obviously salary and benefits related to our employees. Orland Park Health and Fitness costs, we have a contract with them so that we don't have complete control over what is budgeted. They actually come up with the budget, so we have those as fixed costs. Technology maintenance, we did put some funds in there, and we'll get to it in a little while, for additional technology projects that may be undertaken next year. Police pension funding, we consider that to be a fixed cost, and then also our sales tax rebates, because those rebates are per agreement. The agreements don't expire usually for 10 years, so those are a fixed cost. And then we took the rest of the expenditures, and we really just kind of divided them into a core variable versus a discretionary. So the core variable are just expenses that, while we might have control over the dollar amount, the expenditure is going to occur. Maybe cleaning of our buildings, our utilities, our mowing. We may do our mowing less often, but we are going to have those kind of costs. And then we have our true, what we call discretionary operating expenditures, which we have complete control over. The board has complete control over whether we do the special event or we do the Orland Public or things like that. So we call those true kind of discretionary costs. We also have what we categorized in a different areas, just revenue that we either levy for or collect that is truly strictly for one purpose, such as the police pension levy. We can't levy for police pension and then not use it for police pension. So we kind of threw those into a separate category. I see that we have that in both places.
I'm sorry. I just want to make mention that Director Mampy and her team, they analyze all of these expenditures, these fixed costs, other than the salaries, which is an actual cost. But they analyze it and they look at the trend over the last, several years to determine whether or not, to decide how much money they want to allocate for that dollar amount.
Yeah, and
So we do analyze it.
yeah, we look at every, and we'll get to that sheet in a second, but we do look at every line item that we list as fixed costs, and we make sure that they are trending. We usually budget based on trend unless we know something different about them. We do look at the salaries. I mean, the full-time salaries are pretty much set by the grade step tables, but we do look very closely at all the part-time salaries. We make sure we're not overestimating the number of hours for the part-time personnel so that we're not budgeting more than we need. So we do spend a significant amount of time on the salary schedules with the various departments. So what we did is, you want to jump over to that spreadsheet? So what we did is we categorized them, like I just said. Now, I don't know if the board wants to walk through these, or if we just kind of want to look at the groupings of them. Like I said, the first grouping was our core fixed. It's all of our salaries, our benefits, all of our employee-related items that we are most likely going to pay. We have our IMRF, our FICA and Medicare, obviously those are salary related. Our police 401A, that's part of their bargaining agreement, so we need to pay that on an annual basis. And then we put the sick time buyback program up as a fixed cost also, because I believe that that's also part of bargaining agreements. So I don't know if you want to, we can talk through these. We put our BIS annual maintenance costs up there. We don't really have a choice. We have to pay the maintenance costs on some of the technology that we use. You can see, it's maybe a little confusing, but you can see the first column is the 2017 amount, and then you can see the column H there is the 2018 amount. So you can kind of see the increases in some of these. We put in some project commitments for BIS because we already have made the commitment contractually. The biggest amount in the 2018, that $501,000 is, the 367 is the amount related to the Tyler technology that we just purchased. We did enter into an agreement with them in 17, but we're paying them in installments, so we need to set aside the revenue in 2018 because we're already contractually obligated to pay that amount. We also put in there an additional $200,000 for just additional technology requests. We know that's very important for the board. So we thought that we would set aside some of our revenues to make sure that we can fund some of our technology initiatives, as opposed to having our technology initiatives being submitted as discretionary requests that we may not be able to fund. So if there's any of these that we disagree with, that we want to move around, that we don't think we should set funds aside for, we can kind of zero them out, and then you'll see when we get to the bottom that target number that we have available to either distribute to the departments or hold on to and have the departments submit their budgets to the board, and then the board determines how it's allocated. You'll see that number would change if we chose to modify any of the numbers that we came up with.
The one question I have here is the fitness center operating costs that are in fixed operating expenditures, but all of our operating expenditures for everything else are variable. So why is that in fixed versus variable? I realize that it's an expected expenditure, so it would fall into the core variable. I was just curious.
Yeah, well, I think, and this is just the way we looked at it, doesn't mean it has to stay this way. Power Wellness actually comes up with the budget and submits it to us. The budget is formulated in a manner to break even. So because we have $3,050,000 up in the revenue, we back that amount out because it's strictly related to Orland Park Health and Fitness.
All right, I understand.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick?
So I think if you look at that page 4 of the spreadsheet, you can see that the core fixed operating expenditures, salary, things that we have no control over, pension costs, are expected to rise by $1.3 million. I see the rest of them that we do have some control over. It looks as though you've cut $2.5 million out of it.
Yeah, the salaries, the first part, the core fixed, I mean, we have about a 2.9% increase in our salaries from 17 to 18, and we have about a 6% increase in our medical benefits from 17 to 18. So that's the majority of the difference that you see below the, about $1.2 million. Do you want to scroll back down to that? The variable, that's a number of different items that myself and Village Manager Lamargo and Carrie Freiling went through at length, and we made some changes, and we can kind of look through them if you'd like. The biggest change in the discretionary operating is capital. So last year in 2017, do I have that? That is down there, right? Yeah. Last year in 2017, we spent about $2.5 million on capital. What we did this year is we set aside funding of about $1.1 million, I believe it is. Yeah, $1,131,000. And what that number is just a 4-year trend. So on average, over the last 4 years, that is what we've spent on operating capital, and our operating capital is funded by operating revenue. So that's really why you see that number decrease. And then the final amount, that's the vehicle stickers, right? Because we're not taking out as much revenue and sending it over to the capital side as we did in 2017, because we don't have a vehicle sticker season in 2018.
Ma'am, could you just explain the operating what that includes, operating capital?
Yeah, so I know that we made this kind of distinction a couple budget years ago. We have operating capital, which is all the capital that's related to the sportsplex and the pool and Village Hall and the Civic Center. So it's all of just our general operating needs for capital dollars, and we fund that with operating revenue. And then we keep our true infrastructure type capital, our roads, our water main, constructing maybe a new building, things like that. We keep that on the capital side, and we fund it with home rule sales tax, grants that we receive from the state of Illinois, or revenue sharing agreements that we enter into, as well as any debt proceeds that we may choose to issue.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick?
So the 2.5 down to 1, was the 2.5 in large part due to our taking on the Health and Fitness Center?
Yeah, there was I think the Dectron cost, I know that it was in there, and I believe that was about $900,000. So we don't have that large expense in here this year. But what I will say, and we'll get to this when we do the capital budget, I know it's kind of crosses over, but we're going to be doing that in September. On the list right now that has been submitted by all the departments, the request for operating capital dollars is about 4 million. So what we have in here is significantly less than the initial request, but that's just a draft. We always, as a team, go through it, and then we present it to the board and go through it further. So that doesn't mean that's what we need to fund, but that is the original request.
So if I see this correctly, our operating revenues, not, and this does not include our excess funds, is 55.3 million. And then we have, if you go back down to the bottom of this page, our expected expenditures is 54.8.
Right.
Okay.
So if you take out that beginning, and we can kind of talk about that now, so if we take out that beginning excess fund balance that we talked about, so that 2.5 million that you see right there, last year we had 4.2, and we took 3.2 of that and we distributed it to the departments, and they were able to fund their variable budgets with that amount. The additional 1 million is what the board used to provide funds for the discretionary requests that were submitted by the departments. So this year, instead of having that 4.2, we're at 2.5. So where we are now is that, and that's with the excess fund balance included. So if we take that out, we're at about $1.8 million. And that would be what we would use to fund the variable budgets of the departments, as well as any discretionary requests that were submitted by the departments. So we can probably target more expenses on here that are in the two bottom categories, the variable and the discretionary, and reduce some of those. Or we can walk through that as a group. Staff can do that, but as of right now, if we count the $783,000 that we talked about as excess money from last year, excess fund balance, we would have $2.5 million to fund target as well as discretionary requests. So that's a significant decline from last year. That does include a lesser amount of capital. I believe the vehicles, what are the vehicles at?
Vehicles are higher.
The replacements. Yeah, so that's also a 4-year average right there on 83.
Well, yeah, I think that's good, and I think the discussion that we have to have is the 2.5 million. From my perspective, it should be for special projects or capital projects, which is I think what we have right here, which is perfect.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, hold on.
Mr. Chairman, so tell us what that 2.5, or last year, the 3.2, uses to
Okay,
fund
so-
these departments, because isn't some of it like paper and
Yeah.
paper
So the
clips?
3 points, so all of the, we'll go through this one more time. So all of the fixed costs that we have listed here become part of some department's budget. They're all the fixed costs within everybody's budget. So we identify those fixed costs, we prepare their budget for them, and then we give it to them with a target amount. And that target amount last year, like I said, there was $4.2 million. And as the village manager, we do this with the village manager said, okay, we've got about $4.2 million. Historically, the department's operating variable expenses have been somewhere between $3 and $3.5 million. So we took $3.2 million of that 4.2 and we gave it to the departments and said, this is yours. We base it on their percentage of the total spending in the last audited fiscal year. We pull out any one-time costs, so they're not getting funding for something that they're not going to spend again. And then they utilize it to fund their variable expenses. So in my department, that's going to be training, it's going to be our office supplies, it's going to be domestic supplies, it's going to be our GFOA memberships, it's going to be the amounts that we pay to GFOA for our CAFR award and our budget award. So we're a small department, we don't get much. For a department like the police department, that's going to be ammunition that they purchase. It's going to be new equipment that they purchase. Where's their uniforms? It's going to be their uniforms that they purchase on an annual basis. So that's what that $3.2 million that we allocate to the department funds. So if we make the decision not to allocate it to them, and we don't count it as a fixed cost, then I won't be able to pay my memberships, or I'll have to ask to pay my memberships, I guess. I won't be able to pay my memberships. I won't be able to pay to get the GFOA awards. Police department won't buy their ammunition. There won't be any extra funding available for them to fund their variable costs.
If, I'll just take ammunition for the police department, that should be part of their budget. They're expecting to use that, so that should be in their budget, not part of 2.5 million at the bottom. It should come out somewhere before we get to this 2.5 million, because it's part of what you're going to spend for your department.
Okay, so we had this conversation in our last meeting about exactly this, about kind of what's a fixed cost and what's not. So we have historically not considered something like that as a fixed cost, and I mean, we're just using something as an example. As we went through it, the three of us, myself, Carrie, and Joe, we were kind of led down the path of we count too many things as fixed costs. We need to really think about, are these truly fixed, or are they variable costs that the board should be able to make a decision on how to spend the money? So we didn't put more in here. We actually pulled some stuff out that we weren't considering fixed because of that.
Aren't there two variable buckets in here right now, variable operating expenditures and discretionary operating expenditures? So anything like that should be in the budget in one of those two places for each of the departments, and would come out of that, so that you're not going to have 2.5 million at the end. We're going to have whatever you plan on spending for those.
Yeah, I think we're, so at the top is the revenue. Then we've got all these minuses. These are all of the expenditures that are going to automatically be put into the department's budget. So we are automatically going to put contract snow removal into the streets budget. We're going to automatically put the auditing fee into the finance budget. So all of those are fixed costs that are going to automatically be put into the 2018 budget. The way we categorized them was, the very top one was, we didn't really have control over changing the dollar amount. Salaries are salaries. Most of them are set by bargaining agreement. So we considered them a true fixed cost, because we can't really control our salaries unless we lay off personnel. The other categories, as when I went through them before, like the core variable, we know we're going to spend on that item. We know that we're going to buy pool chemicals. Do we know we have to buy that exact amount? No, we could probably maybe do something different so that we could spend less on it, but we know we're going to buy it, so we're going to automatically put it into the pool budget. The ones that are below that, those true discretionary, are items that we could operate without spending, but historically, we have automatically put it into the department's budgets. So if the board so chose, we could wipe all of those out, and they would drop into that bucket below, and then the board would be able to make the choice on where to spend that money and how much to spend on those items.
Mr. Chairman?
I detect a question.
Trustee Dodge.
So Anne Marie, I just want to make sure I'm tracking you. So as I look at the discretionary operating expenditures, 3 million, correct?
Right.
All right. And so if I heard you right, playing back how I interpreted it, that's potentially a place for all of us, the department heads and the board, to say, find operational efficiencies, because we want different uses for that $3 million. Did I interpret it correctly?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a perfect example. Let me just, I don't know, let me pick one that we actually budgeted for. So let me see. So what if we do postage? So we've got $51,000 in postage. We consider it variable because maybe we stop mailing something out and we send it electronically instead. So to me, that's an operating efficiency. We no longer mail, we no longer have somebody running the postage machine, dropping it in the mail, sending it out that way. We send it electronically instead. So that's why we put it under that category, because it was something that we felt we had control over. We could change a process, change a methodology, do something more efficiently, and save money, kind of like what Trustee Dodge was just alluding to. If they're in those above categories, they're either set by bargaining agreement or by our health insurance that we give our employees per bargaining agreements, or they're expenses that we know we have to incur, but we might be able to modify the amount somewhat by doing something more efficient. And can you jump up to one of those? So maybe like our liability insurance, that's a perfect example.
I understand all of that, but what I'm talking about is we have $2.5 million at the very end of the day that we have left over, and you're saying we use those for operating expenses. My point is, if those are used for operating expenses, those operating expenses should be up here in one of these two buckets, either a discretionary operating expenditure or the variable operating expenditure, because it's an operating expenditure you know you're going to have. So it should be up there, which will obviously reduce this 2.5 number, which is fine, but it tells us what we really need to know about our various departments.
And Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick?
I think it's just a way that we have done it in the past, which is we give the sum to the department to make those kind of determinations, as opposed to saying you get $5,000 worth of paper clips.
Yeah, so I think Mayor Peacock, what you're saying is that those amounts for paper clips or my dues that I have
Yes,
to pay.
office supplies, whatever.
Therefore, and if we did it that way, then truly the finance department, with the assistance of the village manager's office, would be formulating the entire budget. So what we've historically done is identify those fixed costs that we don't want the department to determine. So let's just say we don't want Public Works Streets to decide how much they're going to spend on salaries, because their salaries are fixed. But we as staff can't tell Public Works that you can have $50,000 for asphalt. So that's a variable expense that they identify. And then what we do is we take all these fixed costs, we add them to what they come up with using what we distributed to them, and that becomes their operating budget. Otherwise, we would be doing the entire budget.
And just to add to that as well, I mean, there are items that we know that historically the board has wanted to make sure that were included in the budget. So again, taking that decision-making away from the directors and ensuring that those items are budgeted for. Perfect example, special events. We look at special events, we know that the board wants the special events placed in there. And so Anne Marie will take those monies and she will set those aside before, to ensure those dollars are there. Stationary, depending on what's going on, for us to go and start determining stationary for each department, I think that would be kind of silly. But with that being said, again, a lot of these are things historically that we know that the board really wants to make sure that are included in the budget. And then there are some, as Anne Marie was alluding to, that really are must-haves that we have to have in there as well. But we can
$31,000.
change it a little bit. Legal fees is a perfect example.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman?
Oops.
Trustee Fenton?
Just as you used and I'm just asking this question as an example, you just used special events as an example. So is the special events money, is that in that 2.5, or do you have that budgeted?
That's already budgeted for. So
budgeted
if you can look right here, it's right, it's got the $431,440. But what we did this year, because we categorized what we were classifying as fixed expenses, we actually categorized that as a discretionary operating. So it's up to the board's discretion 100% on whether or not we fund those special events. So Mayor Peacock, we could absolutely zero that out. It becomes part of that $2.5 million, and then the board decides whether or not special events get funded. But historically, and I know it doesn't have to remain that way, we as staff has set that aside because we've known that these special events are going to happen. We're going to do them, so we need to make sure that we've set aside funding to be able to do them.
Mr. Chairman? Trustee Dodge?
Yes, so Joe, I just want to make sure that I kind of understand this. On the $3 million, theoretically, that does not need to be spent, correct?
Correct. There, you have the must-haves, but can play around with the numbers a little bit, and then the wants, I think, would be three ways to put it. And you're talking about the wants.
And I would tend to agree with that to a certain extent, but some of those wants are things that I mentioned
Our needs.
that a department truly needs to function.
So the 2.5 million that we end up with down here that we are now allocating back out to the departments for them to make decisions, so we'll call it miscellaneous, okay? So that number, to me, that's where the $750,000 that we're rolling over from the previous year, the savings, needs to come out of the operating budget. That we need to make that decision if for capital, that should be saved for capital projects, not for operating. Now, if we decide we can't get there in 1 year, or there's no place to get there and we have to do that, that's a decision for the board. But I think as a practice, that excess that we were rolling over from the previous year shouldn't be part of that miscellaneous that we're just spending. We should use those and allocate those out for capital projects. And then I understand what you're doing.
And you mean true capital, not operating capital?
Correct.
Well, and
Mr. Chair, Mayor, would you be opposed to the operating capital? Capital or, because you have operating capital and then you have.
Right, and it depends on what you're all of what you're classifying as operating capital.
So
it's what I kind of talked about earlier. We consider our operating funds to be recreation, general, and civic centers. So operating capital is any improvement to the village hall or to the sportsplex or the pool or Orland Park
Yes,
Health and
that would be
Fitness.
fine. However, what I would like to see is those departments that are generating those savings being able to use those. So if it happens to be Parks and Rec, then they could use it as operating capital. But if it's a different department, they could use those savings for their capital projects. Because that incentivizes the departments to be efficient.
Yeah, and so the operating capital, I'm sorry, Trustee Calandrello, but the operating capital, like some of it is the HVAC systems, the boilers.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the savings doesn't always equate to a department only
Understood.
because some of it comes from revenue.
Understood.
This is a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I don't think Trustee Dodge mentioned for the record why he was attending remotely. The ordinance requires it. Just, we can ask him.
Trustee Dodge?
I'm out of town for purposes of my employment. I do have a follow-up question, by the way, so thanks for that opening mic.
Go ahead, Trustee Dodge.
All right, so Anne Marie, just make sure I got the math right. So 3.1 discretionary operating, and I apologize if I missed this part of the conversation earlier. If I flip that up to discretionary operating expenditures, right, your details above,
Yep, go ahead.
1.3 on capital, or 1.1, excuse me, on capital.
Yeah, so you may have missed this part of the discussion. I'm not sure if you were on yet or not, James. So if you look at that last year, and it was what I was just talking about, that we consider what we consider operating capital versus our true infrastructure type capital. And our operating capital has historically always been funded with operating dollars. That's just, we've always kept that segregated for a number of reasons. So last year, if you see, we budgeted about $2.5 million for capital, but included in that amount was a significant piece of equipment for the Orland Park Health and Fitness Club. We won't have that expenditure this year, but we do have on our current request list, which is just a draft request list at this point, it's nothing final, we do have requests of approximately $4 million in operating capital. And a lot of that is truly maintenance-related type capital expenditures, a new boiler, new HVAC units, things like that. The $1.1 million that you see there, just because we didn't want to make any huge assumptions, is we just took the 4-year average of what we've spent on operating capital over the last 4 years, and that's where that number came from.
Okay, follow-up. So a detailed question and then more of a policy question, I guess, for the whole board. So Anne Marie, so I look at the vehicle equipment replacements, $800,000, right?
Yeah, and that is also a 4-year average.
So we're budgeting $864, but if following the lines of the conversation, if we are looking for cost effectiveness or efficiency, we could, and this is a much a question for you and Joe as it is for the full board. If we reopened our policy about how often and with what we replace vehicles, that number could be compressed. Is that fair?
Yes.
That's fair, yep.
Okay. All right. So and the reason I'm pushing this point, and I think everybody probably understands, which is for a lot of these things, we can ratchet down these numbers for cost compression to fund other things or just not see revenue increases. So just putting that point out there. Got it?
And we can, Trustee Dodge, we continue to analyze these numbers throughout the process as well. So if we're able to extend the life of a vehicle, we will. If we're able to your point exactly, if we're able to stretch out the life of anything, we absolutely will.
And Trustee Dodge, we've also had discussions on certain items that might fall within the department discussions, but we've already had some of those discussions about where there could potentially be other savings that aren't even captured here yet, to compress those numbers, to give us the opportunity to make those, if we decided to go from the 1.1 in capital requests to the 4 million, is there $3 million we can pull out of elsewhere to make that happen?
Yeah, and we've been talking to the department heads a lot about looking for those efficiencies. Not all of them are going to materialize as dollars, but we've been talking to them about that when they come to the board with their departmental budget, to identify not only efficiencies, but maybe some revenue enhancements of current revenues that we have that could be adjusted to give us a little bit more revenue. But those will all come to us as part of the departmental budget hearings.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Rizek?
One question I had related to the training, and it looks like you doubled the budget on that, roughly? It went from
Yeah, I
50
never
to
did
100.
change that. Yeah, from 45 to 100.
Yeah, so what do we anticipate doing in 2018 that's double what we did in 2017?
Some of it is the HPO training that we're doing 2 sessions as opposed to 1 session. Each session's about $30,000. Increasing the number of green belt and yellow belt and black belt for the Lean Six Sigma projects, amongst other training
So do we think
programs,
we can-
professional development programs that we have that we do. We have leadership training that the ICMA puts on that we will offer to all village staff as well. So there's a lot of different training opportunities and professional development that we're doing throughout
Right,
the
and
year.
I know when times were tough, that was one that pretty much got to zero, I think,
Yeah, we
right?
didn't
do
budget for
anything
training
a long
for
time.
years.
And I'm all for the HPO training, and I think you guys have, done a great job, and I've heard nothing but great reviews on it. It's just, I know it's very time intensive, and can we afford to have 2 groups next year? I mean, not money-wise, I'm saying it's staff time that is taken up by the training, too.
And one question on top of that would that be something we're going to discuss in the department?
It's just in here, so.
No,
I
yeah,
just-
no, I'm just curious if it's something that we're going to, or should,
So that's part of the village manager's budget, and the non-departmental budget that we provide. So you'll see,
Yeah,
we'll be
you'll
going
see
through
it
all of
again.
these throughout the process, and you'll have more detail included on each one.
Right.
These were just
Sure, we don't wanna talk
items,
about
traditional things that we looked at.
We don't want to get into the expenditures.
Right, do that.
That's good.
But Trustee Ruzick, to your point, we've actually, at first we started with our executive staff, and now we've done mid-level management and also some line staff, and we've had staff asking when they can go because they're hearing about it. We're starting to implement it, and so they're wanting to participate in it as well.
Okay. We'll talk about it later.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay.
Trustee Calendro?
Just 2 things. First of all, when we do get back to if the conversation about giving targets, so we'll be giving targets to department heads. We'll be getting, we get pretty much, so we have control. If, say, we save a pot of 2.5, you divide it the way you want to divide it, we'll still have an opportunity to see all the costs. It's not like it's going to be like we just give a blank check to, the development services, here's your $5 million, to have fun with it. We'll be able to see it, and we could actually make amendments when we have the flesh out numbers like years before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you'll get that same long, detailed book, and we'll go through it
I have
the
mine.
same way.
Yes, exactly.
And
So
then
you'll have the summary of the line item, but then you'll also on the back pages you saw there's a detail of what that breaks it down to, so you know exactly what we're spending each dollar on.
So it's an opportunity to look into that 2.5 or whatever that number
Absolutely.
is.
Yes.
And I guess, and the question I have about here is, looking at some of these cuts, and I know that we're trying to be conservative and be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. That's what we're here for, number one. I worry sometimes about cutting too much and cutting our services. In particular, I think we're kind of been focusing on discretionary operating expenditures. I see that we're cutting the annual report. I believe that's a huge transparency issue for our residents. I think that most people get information from the four publics and the annual report. It's not a huge ticket item, but it is substantially $75,000. I feel like that is a huge transparency piece, and also shows our residents what we're doing with that money. So I have a little hesitancy of cutting that out. And I know we're trying to cut where we can, but I feel like that's a spot that I have a heartburn with, particularly because I want to make sure the residents know the good, the bad, our financial numbers, disclosures, and I really don't think it can be done through just sending a web blast. I think residents heading in the door, seeing the booklet, find out what the village did, and then they can come and tell us, I don't think your numbers are right. I don't like the project you're doing. I feel like that's a huge piece of us getting out there. You know, most of us have full-time jobs. I wish I could knock on everyone's door every day, but I can't. That's an opportunity, those four pieces in the annual report, to knock on everyone's door. So I just feel like that's something I like to put back in.
Right. So Trustee Calendro, just to some of your point there, it would be available electronically. So the identical booklet that you'd be physically getting would be on our website. So they would, and it would be in a flip book format. So that same book would still be available. But you're right, it would not be mailed out directly to their to the homes. So if you know, if the board wanted us to just put the annual report back in and eliminate some of the other publications, we can do that as well. But just trying to find, you know, the efficiencies within the department. You know, there are some decisions, as we had talked about before, that, you know, might cause a little bit of heartburn. And, you know, before we would eliminate maybe needing new equipment for our public works department, when there was a choice between the two, figure that the publications was an easier cut than doing something else. The other thing that you noticed too, we did cut out the telephone town hall items, but you know, I've talked to the mayor about that. We could do some traditional town hall meetings, or we can go to different areas of the village and do town hall meetings in different subdivisions as well. So not eliminating the communication to the public or the opportunity for the public to come in, but just trying to augment that to try and save some additional costs.
And I appreciate that, Joe. I feel if we can try to work that back in, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
I don't know if you need a vote to put it back in, but I'm not sure what we're doing with, if we're going line by line, but I really just think that's something that our residents expect us to do.
I would, for that item, I would ask for the board to give us some direction on that. Just
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick.
One comment. So, no new debt in 2018.
Right.
No new taxes. We're not going to take on any new revenue sources that are available to us. And our 7th year of a flat property tax levy.
That's correct.
So we're either going to raise some revenue, make some cuts if we're going to continue to operate like this. So for that reason, I'm okay with one less public. And I would think, you know, public works in other areas are more important.
And
This is,
And just to point out, Village Manager Lamargo and I had a discussion just before this. I mean, it's the first time we've talked about it, and he had mentioned that he took this out. And we talked about other ways around this that could potentially maybe put a couple of publications back in that would be far less expensive than $78,000.
That's right. I
Also,
apologize for not
regarding the teletown halls, about having other vehicles with which we can meet with the public that aren't costly for us to do, because that's the prudent thing to do if we're in a budget cut. A budget situation where we're trying to cut some expenditures, is for us to be more available in other ways, and it does not have to be through a teletown hall. So we did discuss some of that. I think that when we talk about the village manager's budget, that's something we should talk about on a line item basis on expenditures, just like we are with all these other things.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Guerra.
I know we're, you know, looking closely at all the line items, and I appreciate that. We have the special events listed here. Are we going to go line by line through those tonight, or is that just informational purposes?
well, and I don't want to say that we have to like make decisions now, but if we're going to do, well, we kind of do need to know
It's in the
if
target
the cuts that we made here are okay with the board, because if they're not, that changes that 2.5 million to some different amount, some lesser amount. And if the board is all going to agree to not utilize that $790,000, and instead, I'm assuming we would add it to capital, so we'd have $1.8 million in capital instead. If we're going to make those decisions, we kind of need to know, because we need to go back and start having the departments formulate their budgets. So we need to be able to tell them, are we distributing 2.5 million? Are we distributing 1.8? Are we distributing 1.5 because we're putting some of these fixed costs back in? So I don't want to like force you to make these decisions, but we kind of need the guidance on it so that we can move forward.
Kind of just to add to what Director Mampy was saying, that Trustee Guerra, that, or any of these items here, I mean, for example, if with the public as an example, we can put that in as a discretionary, if so be it. So we'll make sure, might not be part of the target, if the public information office can't fit it within their target, put it as part of their discretionary, and if the board at that time decided that they wanted to put a portion of it, or do like a hybrid with some, augment it with some maybe smaller type of publications that would be a little bit more cost effective, we can do it at that time. We can research some of those other items and the cost for that. As far as the special events are concerned, we do have a number of special events. That is one area that when myself, Director Mampy, and Assistant Village Manager Freiling were going through, we did not feel it was for us to decide what special events should be cut at all. So I know
Yeah,
that
we can
as
bring
far
up
as the
that
special
list if
events,
you'd
we
like.
could break them down with the costs for each one of those. So right now, we've left it status quo, but if we're looking at trying to reduce some of those costs for that,
You
we've
actually
got
increased
up
it
here.
almost 10% from the looks of it, right?
I'm sorry?
You actually increased it almost 10%. Special events,
Yeah,
8%.
yeah,
something.
it's based on the 2017 budgeted amount, yep.
Yeah, the amount that we actually spent in.
Do we want to look at the special events? We have a listing of them that kind of shows the revenue and expenditures related to each. It's up to the board.
Well, I mean, tonight we were supposed to be focusing mostly on the revenue and the bigger picture. I guess what I'm concerned about is going into detail on each of these line items when we're going to be talking about it at a department level, and we have a lot more meetings to do.
Right.
I'm not sure that, and not to mention the fact that we don't have all of the background information on that here tonight to have looked at before we got here.
So the only thing to what Director Mampy was asking before, if the board is, at least on the cursory, okay with the recommendations that we've made thus far with this item, that gives us then the target to be able to move forward with the department so they can start formulating their budgets. So that's really what we're kind of looking for tonight as far as this is concerned. We were prepared to speak on any of the items, but you're absolutely right, Mr. Mayor, that we will be going through all of this in detail at the department level budget hearings. We just need to know just to get started if that 2.5 is okay to move forward with.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Rizzi?
my understanding is the 2.5 includes the 700,000.
Thank you.
It's
You're taking the
800,000.
next right
Okay.
sentence out of my mouth.
So I think the first issue is we have to decide if all or any of that, some portion, is going to be carried over as we have in the past.
Right.
And start with that pot of money at the beginning. So I think that's kind of the first question.
And I
for the
guess
board.
my position on that, like we talked about, is if it's 2.5 million and we're carrying over 750,000,
That
whatever that
includes that
exact number was.
783, yes.
That 750,000 should be, inside that 2.5, should be earmarked towards capital projects. And even if it's operating capital, that's okay, but it should be an operating. So if you want to make, you want to make that delineation and say, okay, these are for your operating capital projects, I'm
Sure.
okay with that because it's capital project.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Guerra?
doesn't that really make it easier because it's capital versus operating capital? It's just a change in terms. The money's still going in the same direction.
It's still going the same direction. We just need to make sure we're using it on capital, not on our ongoing variable expenses like paper clips, and that kind of stuff.
No, but it would be building type thing, that the
The operating
HVAC,
capital,
that
yes,
kind of
it's,
thing.
right,
So
yes, exactly.
It's
So,
still just
to your
taking it
point-
out of the other bucket. and putting
Yes,
it-
Mr. But we can absolutely make sure that 783 is towards that operating capital.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Rizzi.
do we think, we have 2 million in operating capital needs?
Well, the
Oh, you
list-
said there was 4. The
Right.
request was 4,
Right.
okay. We do.
We do.
Never mind.
We're never short.
But every year we do, and we do evaluate it. We look at, are these projects that we realistically can get
Get
done
done.
in that fiscal year? Is it something that we can hold off for another year? There are some times that, that are items that because those are the easiest ones to pick up because they're very expensive items, we try and expand the life of that. And there are some instances, as you've seen, it's come to the board that sometimes they just don't happen. But that's part of the reason why we have the contingency fund for those emergency types of repairs. So,
And
but we do evaluate them. We do have actually. I apologize.
That's okay.
We had CTS, our energy auditors. So we do have identified all of our mechanical equipment and basically the condition that they're in and the life expectancy of them. But we have very talented staff that can put Band-Aids on things if we need to.
Right. Although, when we make these repairs on an emergency basis, that's not the time, it's usually the costliest time to be doing it.
Right. I mean, the good news of that is you won't see that that request in the next budget year.
Right.
So it is happening. So I'm trying to look at the silver lining here.
We had also talked as a group, myself and Joe and Carrie, and we also talked to staff a little bit about it today too, was that maybe our capital for the next year is maintenance type capital. Let's fix what we have, let's fix what needs to be fixed as opposed to new things. So we might still budget a significant amount, but it would be more to kind of fix those things that Joe alluded to that we just keep putting off year after year that just need to get done as opposed to spending on new.
Trustee
That would-
Carroll.
Thank you. First of all, I'm not a financial guru. If I were, I wouldn't have gone to law school. But when we're talking about the issue of like this audited excess fund balance and the mayor's concern that if we apply it to operating expenses as opposed to capital, what if that were to dry up? Well, I'm just so I understand, make sure I'm not seeing it wrong. If that were to happen, where we didn't have that 4.1 or 2.1 or whatever it might be, because I think you said at the lowest it was 3.5 or whatever. If we didn't have that, then we would, in that following year, be forced to budget fewer capital expenses, correct?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So am I wrong in kind of seeing it as a matter of semantics, where we apply that money, whether we apply it just to the general budget or not?
You
Yeah,
can look
I
at
mean,
that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, part of it that goes into the calculation is when we calculate the reserve, like you saw that reserve go down a significant amount. When we calculate the reserve, we pull those one-time things out, so we're not reserving for them. So in a year that we have a large budget that has a large amount of capital in it, we pull all that out, and you're going to see our reserve go down, so that might leave additional excess funds available.
If we had a year like the mayor's hypothetical where we got slaughtered on the budget and we didn't have as large an excess fund balance. I think you said the one last year was the smallest we've had in quite a long time. But let's say we're down to zero.
We just
The
wouldn't do
process
any.
would be the next year we would budget fewer capital expenses.
Right,
correct?
that would probably be our first step, is to eliminate the capital for that year and fund our true core
Right,
operating
and my concern is
expenses.
not the capital expenses. My concern is when it's operating expenses. That's my concern, is when the excess is not used for capital, when the excess is used for operating, now you have an ongoing problem.
I understand the concern. I'm just saying if we look at the history of the last 20 years and how much we've averaged on capital expenses, if we made it through the recession without having to do that.
Exactly.
If there were a catastrophic event, the first response, I think, if I see it correctly, is that we would just not
Eliminate
budget
the
as much
capital.
capital expenses the following year.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That would be one way.
And
Just,
oh, I'm sorry. I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say throughout the year we are always looking at efficiencies and analyzing how we're spending our monies, where we're spending them, the priorities. So we are constantly reviewing that throughout the year, not just at the budget time.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick.
So if there's a consensus to pull that 700 or 800,000 and put it in the line item called capital
Okay, go
requests.
ahead and do that. We're going to do that on the screen.
Okay, that would bring this target down to 1.7 million, and that would include discretionary. It would, which, so there'll be no discretionary spending, I'm assuming.
So, okay, so that was a point that Sarah and I were kind of whispering about a little bit over here. So that brings that available amount to fund whatever. I'm not going to, whatever we decide to fund with it, down to $1.8 million, which last year was the 4.2. So that is all of the variable expenses in the various departments, and that is also any discretionary requests which would be brought to the board. So we were going to talk about in a few minutes, I believe it's the last slide of the presentation, the personnel requests that have already been submitted by departments. They were approximately $800,000. Myself and Joe and Carrie went through them, and Joe is recommending about, I think, $511,000. So the variable operating expenses in all the operating departments, as well as any discretionary requests that the departments bring forward, will have to be funded with that $1.8 million. I'm just making sure we all understand it. Last year, that amount was 4.2. So that is a decrease, a significant decrease in their operating budgets. Will we find it? We'll have to, but I just want to kind of make sure we all understand the ramifications of it.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenton.
I just have a quick little comment. So we're down to 1.8 versus what we had before, and we're cutting things like which I don't have a list of what was taken out or anything like that, but if we're making cuts, then I would hope that we don't have any new positions in this budget. If we're considering cutting things that our residents are used to, whether it be the public or a special event or whatever, I would hope that we're not going to have any new positions created in this. But I'm not talking about somebody moving from a 1 to a 2 or however all that stuff, maintenance worker 1 to a maintenance worker 2. I would just hope that we wouldn't be creating new positions that have to come out of that 1.8 when staff has made a decision staff has made a recommendation to eliminate some special events or the Orland Park Public or whatever else you've chosen to make your recommendations on. So my question is also, where is this list of recommendations of cuts?
Well, that's here. So we
you
can
should
kind of,
have-
if you want to scroll through, we can kind of scroll
No,
through
I've
it.
got that, but where is specifics?
Well,
I see the reductions.
yeah, so
So,
those.
for example, capital requests went from 25 last year to 119.
Yep.
So where are the specifics that staff is recommending to be cut?
Well, those are them. So if you look, we're saying, okay, we're going to cut capital by about $600,000. Let's scroll down a little bit.
Right, you're taking out the commissioner's dinner, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Right, so those are the cuts that were recommended by us. The intergovernmental consultants, we usually have 2 of them for $80,000. We're recommending 1 for $40,000. So all of those are the recommendations
Those are the
that we're bringing
specifics.
forward. Those are the specifics.
And Trustee Fenton, to your point, with some of the positions, we have picked up some additional responsibilities, additional resources. So, for example, recreation has picked up, a couple new special events along with the Orland Park Health and Fitness, which continues to increase their responsibilities with that, and in order to give them some support, there was a position in there that I'm recommending to approve. But again, ultimately, it's up to the board whether or not they want to fund that position or not, or approve that. Another example is Parks Department has picked up not only an additional building with the Orland Park Health and Fitness with the maintenance there, and we do have contractual services that cover that, but also the pond maintenance as well. And some of those areas can't or are not covered by or underneath that contract, that we do need staff there to be able to assist with that. And you'll see that there were 2, I recommended 1, which you'll see there. Again, all those positions would be discussed in full detail at each departmental hearing. It was just to give you a snapshot of what we were looking at. But at the end of the day, it's the board that's going to approve the budget and determine whether or not they want to fund those positions or approve those positions or not.
So if I can summarize there, Trustee Fenton, I think what he's saying is that we're going to look at each of these cuts that are in here. We'll be looking at a department level in detail when those department hearings come up.
That's correct.
Correct. Joe had just brought up some of this stuff when we had our weekly meeting, and it's just a little bit different version than what's up on the screen, so.
Yeah.
Because I was told that special events were being cut, and yet, as you stated a few minutes ago, it's about a 10% increase from last year.
Right.
So obviously, nothing was cut if we've got an increase.
Right. And that was one of those things that at the time we were looking at possibly making recommendations for some of the special events, and thought that I did not think it was the position of the village manager to make a recommendation of some special events to be cut, that should be decided on the board level. So you're right, Trustee Fenton. Some of the things up there are a little bit different than what we had discussed. Because as a matter of fact, I think when we met at the time, we were looking at maybe reducing the Orland Park Public by one publication, and now it was, the recommendation is to eliminate all four of them and just do them electronically. So there's some further discussions that Director Mampy and Assistant Village Manager Freiling and myself were talking about with some of that. So my apologies for the confusion.
Oh, that's okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Guerra.
So again, and you use the example of the Orland Park Public being eliminated in the budget. This is just a recommendation from the village manager's office. It's up
Yes.
for this group to decide.
Yes, absolutely. This is all a recommendation. At the end of the day, the board does approve the budget, and they will determine whether or not they want to follow any of the recommendations, do a little hybrid of both of them, or decide not to. So
And we will discuss those recommendations in detail.
absolutely, in detail,
For
yes.
each department.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Dodge.
just a broad comment. Sorry for the echo.
No echo here.
No? All right, perfect. So if I look at these numbers, special events, 430, vehicle and equipment, 860, $1.1 billion for capital, and we're kind of in a way playing budgetary pancakes over 73 grand for maintenance that our customers may care about. So I guess, we don't have to go into it right now, but I really want to hear from the department head and Anne Marie and Joe, which is okay. What is the plan to tackle structural operating costs? I haven't heard it yet. I do apologize for the group, but
Somebody want to
James,
Jim,
we're really
you're,
struggling.
You're coming in from the moon right now.
Are you on a headset by any chance?
yeah, is this better?
Yes.
So you can repeat all of what you just said.
Well,
we got
I
1 by
said
5.
that I miss you guys and I love all of you.
That's what I got.
This is more of just a broad-based question, and I know we're going to get into the details later, but I'm less concerned about the puts and takes on 73 grand for the Orland Park Public as opposed to what is the process and the policy change on 800 grand for equipment, 400 grand for special events, and 1.3 for call capital, let alone something. It's like, okay, let me just pick on electricity.
You're drifting again there, Jim.
Yeah.
So, Trustee
All right,
Dodge,
anyway, let's go back to my central premise. I love you guys.
Now we can hear you
We can hear
again.
that,
comes in loud and clear.
Let's keep it
Yeah.
that way.
Trustee Dodge, if I kind of caught it, you are basically wanting to know what the policy moving forward. You're not so concerned about more of the smaller items like the $75,000 for the public, but
Right.
moving forward, what's the policy that the board may want to give us direction to look at the larger items such as the special events and the vehicle replacement? Is that?
Yes, because those are the bigger numbers. So what are we doing, all of us, to attack the bigger numbers? And that's been an open question for us for years, which is, why are we using 500 grand of electricity? Is there no conceivable way to reduce that?
Yeah, and those are the items, James, that we kind of categorized as the ones that, yeah, we can control those. We can come up with ways to be more efficient, to decrease our electricity costs or our natural gas. Maybe we bid our natural gas or something like that. So those are the ones that we kind of identified that we can absolutely control.
And throughout the budget.
So good, because then we don't have to discuss public, no public. It's just find a way to compress cost by, let's just pick a target, 10% to do more of what our customers want. So we need to have that as part of our debate going forward, is my essential point. Not the details tonight. That's not what I was trying to accomplish.
So Trustee Dodge, I think what you're saying is, let's look at the big numbers. I think one of the things, if we're allocating $8 million as opposed to 4.2, that's going to force our departments to look at those numbers and ask those questions. So it kind of puts it on our department heads to start asking those hard questions of, if we want to get $4.2 million of this variable expenditures, then we need to find a place where we can cut those big items. And if we can cut our electricity costs down by 20% and bring us down to 400 grand or 450, that's a big savings that we can add everywhere else. Does that answer?
That broadly was the point I was making, that I think it's on all of us to do that. That's my point.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And throughout the process, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, throughout the process, we are continuing to evaluate that. The equipment, for example, we are, Director Ingram is looking at some of that if we're able to find some of those savings. And there are going to be some recommendations that the board will have to decide on, items that we've been doing for years that might not add value to the community that we've done over the years, and continue to look at those efficiencies and ways that, basically work smarter, not harder. That's a quote from you, Trustee Dodge.
Joe, thank you, because in the private sector, if you're going to spend $100,000 on training, you should get a 10x return. So you've got to find $1 million worth of savings, Joe.
Got it.
Well, and I think one of the critical questions here is when you're getting less of this discretionary variable at the end of the day, that everyone involved with those department head hearings have to look at, okay, if we want that number to be higher, then where are the opportunities for efficiencies elsewhere? And that starts to force you to ask those questions. Without putting yourself on the spot to ask those questions, the questions don't get asked.
Right. There may be some heartburn with some of the decisions, though, that were recommendations that we're bringing forward, though, just because of, the wants versus the must-haves.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Rizek.
I said this earlier, but without any new taxes, with keeping our property levy flat for a 7th year in a row, these sorts of cuts are going to have to take place, or we're going to have to find new revenue sources. I know that's not a popular time in Cook County to be talking about new revenue sources, but this trajectory is going to continue, because as our, salary and fixed costs go up by 1.3 million a year, I mean, we're going to have to cut. That's going to continue.
Right.
So there are going to be some decisions that need to be made that, may not be.
Or see revenue growth.
Or see, as Director Mampy had mentioned, the state giving the surcharge on collecting
Home rule sales tax.
And right off the bat, we're losing nearly $500,000 because we're paying nearly $5,000 in.
But that's not on
fees.
the operating side.
No, on the capital
right,
side,
right,
on the capital,
right.
but the overall budget.
Yeah, that'll
on the
be
cap,
on
right,
that.
which will
Right.
be a later date, but it's just some tough decisions that we're making.
Okay, so I have some thoughts. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, Trustee Calendar.
Mr. Mayor.
Trustee Calandrello.
Just a couple of quick thoughts, and I to piggyback Trustee Ruzic's point, I think we do have to look into some new revenue. I don't think it's the levy, maybe some other things. Also, I think we need to look into maybe tying our levy to pensions. So I think we talked briefly about it would be a couple pennies a year possibly to tie it in to make sure that our pensions are funded well. I know this is kind of a side, but I mean, if it's 3 pennies a year, I think everyone and I think our constituents would see that we're being good stewards of the tax money, that we're keeping pensions, and I know we're doing very well compared to other places. And also, we collect less than our fire district. Just think about that. And we have police force and all the services we do. So we're doing a really good job at what we're doing. So I think we need to look into those things, particularly maybe attaching our levy to the pension. So we'll go up 3 cents, or I think we talked briefly, it might be 3 cents or 4 cents a year to tie it with the pensions, to keep our funds keeping going like that, because I think we can control the operating. I have a little heartburn of the policy decision if we do take the excess fund balance and put it to operating capital. And that my heartburn is the federal government budgets like this, the county, which I used to work for, budgets like this. If you don't use it, you lose it. So at the end of the year, Tim's going to buy 1 million bullets. At the end of the year, people are going to buy pencils. So guess what? I used all my budgets. I want it back. I think the excess fund balance is, yes, maybe things went under, Tim have officers out or people retirements or whatnot. But also what it does, it doesn't penalize good budgeting departments. That's my only concern. And I agree with the mayor that one day we won't have any excess fund balance, but that day is not today. And if we don't use it, I think we will overtaxing then.
So-
Go ahead.
So I'm just very, very concerned of the policy and the management based that. The federal government does it that way. When you don't use it, you lose it. And now how many $1 trillion of debt do we have? I just feel like, and at the end of the day, we can say no until the line items if we don't like it. And then maybe we'll start, everything we cut, we put in a bucket to put it in something else. I just feel like at this early process, we shouldn't take the excess fund reserve and put it back to the operating capital. That's just my belief. I think that's just my belief.
So I actually think it's appropriate to know that since it's decreasing over time and we're going to face this, that we should start asking the question now and not wait until that day of reckoning comes. That's what's gotten the federal government, the state, Cook County in a lot of trouble. Secondly, as I said earlier, I think that any savings that are directly attributable to a department should go to that department, which I think I was pretty clear in stating earlier. And you said some of those excess funds are due to revenue. Those we should divvy out, however we decide to divvy it out. But if it's actual savings from their budget, then those particular departments should be rewarded for that and be allowed to use it. That money should be used for their capital projects and their special projects.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Trustee Calandrello.
So of the excess fund reserve, how much of that $783,000 can you tie to different departments for savings?
I have no idea how much of that would go to each department.
I agree with the mayor. That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good policy. I agree with that.
That's something we'd have to work through too, because there are some departments that budget a lot, I don't know how to say this, that budget very efficiently or don't have costs that, like they know their costs, like us, like finance, we know what our costs are going to be every year, and we come pretty close every year. But there's other departments, such as maybe parks, who, when they budget, they're not sure how much of their restoration supplies they're going to use, or their playground equipment supplies. So they budget kind of based on history, but they may have a great year and not have to use a lot of those supplies. So if we're going to allocate the savings back to them, I don't know that that would be a fair way to allocate because of the differences in the operations of each of our departments. So we'd have to think about something like that. I think it's a good idea, but I think we'd have to think about how we did that.
We can absolutely do that, and you said that a good portion of this is due to revenue, so we can, as a board, decide that, hey, there's departments like yours that everything is pretty much fixed and we know what it is, so there's not going to be a savings. Well, we can decide this is how much we want to allocate to you.
So just kind of to wrap up this section of it, I know it's only July 31st, but we do have to get moving. This takes us, as you guys know, this is a very long budget process that we go through, and it takes us quite a while to get things together. And given that this is going to be a very different environment this year, it's going to take us even longer. We're really going to have to work very closely with all the departments on putting this together. So I think the way I understand it is that the $1.8 million is what we're considering as, I'm just going to call it target, just for now. So that's what we're considering as our target dollars. The $700,000 in savings, we've moved it up and we've put it in capital because we want to spend any savings from the prior year on capital.
And
So-
can we call that operating capital?
Sure, operating capital, absolutely. So that 1.8 is significantly less than what we had last year. And as I said, we don't have to do things the same, but it is significantly less. So that also, that 1.8, not only needs to go to the departments to fund their variable, but it's also, if you recall, it's the funds that the board was able to use to fund discretionary requests. So does the board at this time, and that number is going to change. Like I said, our revenues are going to change, our spending might change, we're going to move things around. We're going to look at those variable operating again with all the departments. They may decrease, a few of them may increase, who knows? But do you as a board want to truly allocate that entire $1.8 million to the departments to fund their variable budgets? Or do we need to set aside a portion of that because we know there's going to be discretionary requests that the board is going to want to fund? That's question number one.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Ruzick?
and out of that 1.8, the village manager has 500,000 in discretionary requests for staff?
I'm sorry, can you
I
say
said
it?
out of that 1.8 would include the village manager's 500,000 in personnel requests?
If that's what the board chooses.
Okay.
So, but if we're going to go back to the departments and have them formulate their departmental budgets, which is our next step in this process, and that's a step that usually takes at least 6 weeks, and I think is going to take a little bit longer given the lesser amount of money available. We really need to kind of decide if we're using all of it or we're using a percentage of it, if we want to set some aside. I don't want to pigeonhole you, but I'm
Trustee
not quite sure
Calandrello.
how we would move forward.
You know, I just feel like, because at this point, we're going from 4 million, to make sure I'm understanding this right, we're going from 4 million from last year to 1.8, is that correct?
Yes.
3, wasn't it?
No, is it?
Well-
wait,
It's
no.
going to be
The target.
1.3 after we put in the recommendations for the positions.
Okay, so we're going from 4 million to 1.3.
If the board chooses to
Go
put
down
in
this
all
path
those
that we're-
positions.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a significant cut in the overall operating budget, which is, I know exactly what we're looking for. We're looking to identify efficiencies, cut our budget by 5 to 10%. I think
It's about 5%.
overall, and it's hard to say the exact number. It's probably a little bit higher than this. It's probably about a 4% across the board cut in our budget. We can't calculate it actually with all the capital in there and everything else because we'd have to pull out all those one-time expenditures. So it is a cut, but it's also then if we do utilize the entire 1.8, there isn't anything available unless we come up with additional revenue sources or other areas that outside of these where we can make cuts.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
Again, since we're so early in the budgeting process, my thought is, I still think that where we put that $750,000, whatever that number was, is kind of semantic. We've been doing it the same way for umpteen years, and I'm always the one to argue against doing things because we've always done it that way. But while doing that way, we've received year after year of financial transparency and accuracy awards from the trade organizations. I'd prefer to leave it the way we've been doing it. I don't see the benefit to our staff members, to our directors, to tell them that their budget's being cut, that discretionary part of the budget's being cut by almost 3/4. I'd rather leave it where it is, and then we can look at each of those requests like we do and start getting a little bit sharper with the knife there. Look at those requests, see where we want to make some cuts. I think I understand what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, but changing the methodology with which we rollover excess revenue, to me, it does seem semantic, and it seems like we potentially could be losing some very good programs, personnel, efficiencies if we really chop the budget at this part of the stage that much, I think.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Ruzick.
well, do we want to talk about those personnel requests? Because that will give you $500,000 of an answer at least.
Yeah, we can bring those up if you'd like. Absolutely. Personnel.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Dodge.
while we're going down this pathway, I want to, Mike, I'm going to pivot off of your language, which I think is helpful. So, if I'm not mistaken, 5.3 is bigger than 5.4.9. And so I want to be careful, Joe and Anne Marie, it's pretty easy in public budgeting to say cuts or reductions. And realistically, it's not much, but the budget is up. And so from my personal perspective, 1/7, the real directive for you guys is find operating efficiencies,
Right.
so we can do more of what our customers want. And so that means we have to work hard for you guys to press operating expenses in one part of the budget by 5 to 10% to fund increases in other parts of the budget that get us to a better place with our residents. That's the debate I'd like to have, not just, recklessly cut and then use value language to describe that, which by definition the word cut is. So let me stop there and see if one heard me, two of them make sense.
So if I could summarize, because you're cutting out again, Jim, it was, we want to fund certain parts of the budget. We have to find cuts elsewhere in other parts of the budget. And to piggyback on that, my point is by rolling over this amount and at the 1.8 level, it forces people to ask those questions. If you don't force them to ask the questions, they don't. That's just the nature of budgeting. And so this forces people to say, this is where we can make savings, this is where we can't. And then we can come back and have that discussion, okay, we can't get from here to there, what do we do? And that's when it comes back to the questions that were brought out over here is, are there other revenue sources? Or by that time, have we seen that there is an increase in the sales tax revenue, those types of things. But if you don't ask the questions, you never find the answers and you never find those operational efficiencies.
Understand.
That is correct. And if I may, I think, Kathy, you brought this point up earlier. If we layered back in one or two publics, but we used that as a way to fund other special events, it's entirely possible our residents will thank us. And so my whole point for these discussions is to force ourselves as a system to ask the hard questions. I'm perfectly comfortable with a zero increase in the budget, which is tough because we have structural cost changes, but let's look everywhere to fund what we really want to do and what our customers really value us doing. That's the essential point. So I'd love to move away from cuts as opposed to efficiency and funding things. If you guys can hear me okay?
We can't.
True or no?
In and out.
If you're talking through a fan blade, then yes.
Well, let's give Frank some dollars to fix this system. I was about to use a pejorative word.
Frank's here listening.
That's why he stayed here
But
today.
I'll hold back. And I'll send everybody this in writing, that when we have the conversation about people or new expenditures, we ask, and staff is, if you will, forced to justify, get this technology or this person enables me to do X. It's a better conversation than just, I think, a new person costs $75,000 or a training solution staff costs $100,000.
Trustee Dodge, to answer your question, yes. I mean, when we're asking for, technology requests. So for example, the Tyler Technologies, yes, Director Florentine is bringing back, or we will bring back during his hearing, how that will impact the village and village services through efficiencies. Now, as Director Mampy had said earlier, and Trustee Dodge, I don't know if you were on the line at the time, but sometimes those don't equate to savings in dollars, but savings in efficiencies in time, which in the long term could result in some savings of dollars, but in the immediate future it might not. But yes, I mean, again, we are looking at all of these big ticketed items, and we will bring justifications for each item and why we're asking for the dollar amount we are.
Can we talk about the decisions?
Did I capture that right?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, so I guess I'm going to propose a motion.
Trustee Calandrello?
I move to allocate 2.1, which is half of the excess fund balance for the target number. That, I think, is a good compromise, and it also gives a good target out there. To move the conversation.
I think it's 780,000.
Yeah.
No, but half of
No,
seven, so
what,
half
what,
of
what
70.
Trustee Calandrello is saying
Please.
is that instead of moving all of the $783,000 all to operating
2.1.
capital, he's asking, or is the motion's on the board, on the floor
So it's
to.
1.8 plus
That's right.
half of the excess fund balance.
Yes, half of the 783 would go to the operating capital, half would go towards the overall bottom line target.
Correct. Thank you, Joe. I think that's a good, happy target to reduce costs and be good stewards. And I think that's a good way of, I feel like we have a couple diverse opinions, and I think that's a good compromise for everyone to kind of give the board and the staff direction to cut costs, and maybe they'll cut even more, but I think it's kind of good. We don't go from 100 to 0, we go from 100 to 50. If there's no second.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Question.
The motion has been made. Any comments, questions? Trustee Gira?
Yeah, I just, we're talking about alternative sources for revenue. We're talking about cuts. I just wonder if it isn't a little preliminary yet, or a little too soon in the process to be determining how we're going to allocate funds. I think for me, I'd rather have more discussion and see where we're at, what we need, because we may, if we identify new resources, new revenue streams,
Yeah.
we may not have to do that. And in my mind, we're taking it from operating, but we're putting it to operating capital. It's still the same thing. It's just, you're changing the hat.
Yeah,
But,
so-
don't,
Yeah,
go on.
just-
I was just going to say that in order for us to move forward tonight, we have to have direction as to what that target number is, because without that, we can't move to the next level. So to your point, understood, there will absolutely be a lot more discussions during the budget hearings,
All right.
but at least for us to kind of get moving in the immediate future.
And am I correct that money that was in operating, we identified as operating in the excess, by moving it to the operating capital, it's still accomplishing the same purpose, just under
Well,
a
it's just funding
different...
something different. And like James said, we find savings here to fund something else. Like he said,
But I mean,
so it's the same
we know
concept.
we're going to have those costs. We're going to have to replace, believe me, we're going to have to replace HVAC at the Sportsplex. We're going to have to do these things, so we're going to budget for them.
Yeah, so just my thoughts. Obviously, it's a board's
Please.
decision, so just my thoughts. We know that we have $4 million in capital sitting on a wish list. And some of it's not really a wish list, it's stuff that really does need to get done. So if we have these excess funds, will we do this every year? Maybe, maybe not. But if we truly want to do it this year and just throw it onto the capital and increase our capital so that we can actually make a dent in some of the stuff that needs to get done, that's fine. What we could do is do that And then, as I mentioned, I'm hoping that our revenues are going to change a little bit. We're always very conservative. Hopefully, they're going to go up a little bit as we go through the budget process and we're able to generate additional revenue. We can make the decision then, does it get distributed to the departments because they had to make such huge cuts that we want to be able to let them fund something else within their department? Does it go towards capital? Do we want to segregate it for technology? We can kind of make those decisions as we go along. I was just kind of whispering to Sarah, I think that given the way we're going to be doing this and giving the in my mind, pretty big cuts that we're making to the departments by giving them that $1.8 million, if that's the decision. Like the police department alone, it's about $160,000 they'll have to cut from their budget. Doesn't sound like a lot to us, but I guarantee you when we tell Chief McCarthy that he has to cut that from his budget, it'll be significant. So, but maybe we do that. We allocate the excess funds from last year to capital for now, and then as we move forward and we uncover additional savings and or additional revenues, we determine whether it should go to capital or the departments or technology or whatever. But this at least gives us the guidance to go forward.
And I guess my point is by allocating the 1.8 and taking that money to capital, it forces people to start making those hard questions and hard decisions. And then, yes, we find, so that's going to be prioritized, right? This is something we know we can do without. That's something that we probably can do without. This is something we have to have. Is there a way to find money for that? Those are the kind of questions that we need to ask. And by doing this, it forces us to ask those questions, and then we find those revenues. We've identified things that are probably going to be cut and we don't even need, and then we can use that money. Say we find all of that $4 million in extra revenue. Well, some of that can be used for capital as well, and maybe get us back on track with the capital that we're behind on with the HVAC and some of those things that we pushed off.
Okay, so that was one of the decisions we had to make, right? We had to decide what we were going to do with those excess funds, and I'm not sure that that's the majority, but you guys need to let us know. So the other decision is the 1.8, whether it's 1.8 or 2.5 or whatever it ends up being. What are we doing with that? Now, I know, Trustee Ruzick, you mentioned let's look at these personnel requests, because do we want to set aside a specific amount because we know we're going to fund some of them, or do we want to allocate that whole $1.8 million to the departments for them to spend on what they need to spend it on? And maybe they won't need it all, which I'll be very surprised if they can find that much inefficiency, but you never know. Or do we want to set some of it aside because we know that there's going to be discretionary personnel we want to fund. We know there's going to be some technology that we want to fund. Do we want to set anything additional aside? Totally up to the board, but we just kind of need to know to go to the departments and have them start putting their budget together. And I know it's early, you're right, Trustee Carroll, but this is going to take a while. It's a philosophy change, so it's going to take a while.
And with, go ahead, please, Carol. Go ahead.
Trustee Ruzick.
So in light of everything that we've discussed and heard tonight, I mean, my request would not to have any of the personnel requests this year at this point. Again, if we get down the road and we make some other decisions and we can change course, but I think from what I'm hearing, this is going to be a huge change for the staff. And if we now take that $500,000 out of it, it's going to be a really big change.
And I think stepping back as I'm going to forget I'm on the finance director and just talk as just a director, I think it would be tough for a lot of the directors to kind of stomach you need to cut $160,000 out of your department's budget, but we're going to hire these new full-time staff. So it might be a really good idea and if we end up generating a lot of additional revenue and we change our mind, we can do that as part of the process. But for now, I think that's a really good idea.
So will all those I'm sorry,
I was
Mr.
going to
Mayor.
say it's probably also useful to have the discussion when we get to those departments about what their personnel requests are.
And we
just
would
so that
have
we know
anyways.
that just so that we know what's on the table, so when revenue does show up, and maybe there's ideas within the board that say, okay, maybe these are some alternatives to those personnel requests. I don't know what those requests are. I don't know who they're for, but
Yeah, and we were really just historically, we present the personnel
Sorry,
tonight,
Ms.
just for
Mayor,
your information. We don't usually do anything with it until we get to the departmental hearings, but it was just so that the whole board knew what was out there.
Okay.
Trustee Ruzick, just for a point of clarification, new positions you were talking about. I thought, and Trustee Fenton might have been you that had mentioned that some of the classifications might be okay, but you want no personnel, all that would be in discretionary essentially for
I would,
personnel.
again, I think even the reclassifications, the same rationale could be for that. If we're asking departments to cut, why are we reclassifying? If the work's getting done with the staff as they are at this level as opposed to this level,
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Guerra.
I would question that as far as reclassify. We're asking, and we have been for some time, our staff to do more with less and do way more.
Yes.
For example, our Parks Department took over all the ponds. They're doing more, and yet you don't want to give them that little bit of an increase in recognition of what they're doing. They're not getting extra people, they're just being asked to do more. I think I'd like to look at the reclassification, see who they are, and see what the added responsibilities are.
So regarding that, there's requests for pond maintenance, but pond maintenance shifted from Public Works to Parks, correct? So Public Works still has the same amount of people, even though they were taking care of the ponds before, and Parks and Rec are taking care of the ponds with the same number of people. So that, I mean, those are the kinds of discussions that we need to have at the department level.
Right. To that point, though, that the Parks Department is still taking care of ponds, just they were taking care of both the aesthetics and the mechanical piece of it. Now they're taking care of the mechanical piece of it. They're still taking care of the mechanical piece of it, so they still need those personnel to be able to handle that that section. But what we can do is we can put all those into discretionary, and those can be determined by the board during the department hearings whether or not we want to fund those or not. So we won't make any recommendations
If there's discretionary
for it.
funds available.
If they're, right, exactly. So there'll be no recommendations from the village manager as far as new positions are concerned. To Trustee Guerra's point, as you can see on there, the reclassifications really are not amounting to any large dollars. We have been asking a lot of our staff to do additional work at the same amount of pay. And so for those, I would request that we would at least entertain the fact on the reclassification piece of it.
Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Calandrello.
I don't want to be a parliamentary a Robert's rule guy, but I think there's a motion on the table.
There is a motion on the
I think it's
table.
good just to give staff a number and move on.
Well, there is a motion on the table, but I believe that's what we're discussing right now, so this is pertinent to the motion.
I didn't think so, but okay, thank you. I respect the chair.
You know, the motion was actually what to do with the excess fund balance from the prior year. I think now we're talking about what to do with the 1.8 million, so I think we shifted.
But we didn't.
The motion was to make that number
No, exactly.
2.175 million and allocate that over, and that's
Yeah.
what the discussion is about. And
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Dodge.
does this need to be a motion at this stage, or simply direction to staff for a simulation?
Direction is fine with me.
I mean,
we could
I think
just
it's one and the
do a
same. I mean, it's whether or not it's going to be
Right, 'cause you have to have the
2.1
board
or
opinion.
1.8. So I think that's why Trustee Calandrello made that, just so we'd have a consensus from the board, because
Yep.
I know there's difference of opinion
Yeah.
on the board as to how we want to fund
The
that.
attorney's here, we could ask him.
I think you just,
Yeah, we just need
we're not
consensus.
approving anything.
No,
No, we're not approving anything.
This is
We just need
basically
consensus.
So-
for direction.
Can we
So,
table
now,
that
can you withdraw your
motion?
motion?
Well,
Yes, you can make a motion to table it.
At this time, Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Calandrello.
I move to withdraw my motion so we can just get consensus. We don't need to vote. I just withdraw the motion this time for procedure purposes.
Second. I withdraw my second.
The motion has been made and seconded to withdraw the motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. So,
So the
consensus?
motion has carried 6 to 0. I did not hear Trustee Dodge.
He was nice.
It's a technology problem.
Said aye.
So you said aye?
yes. I
So, okay,
believe
that's
it.
7-0. The motion is
Yes.
passed.
So how about consensus?
Yes.
Do you want to just go down and say what?
Sure. I think we should go to the 2.1.
2.1.
I would do the 1.8 as it is now.
I would do the 1.8.
I would say 2.5, but in the alternate 2.1.
I'll go 1.8.
Dodge, you're the, trustee
Trustee
Dodge, you're the decider here.
He doesn't even know.
Ooh, I can feel the power. 1.8.
All right, so 1.8
So we're
is
going to
the...
use 1.8 to carry that over.
Okay.
The-
So it's all going to the departments. We're not going to hold anything back so that the board can make a decision at some point in time to fund something that's submitted as a discretionary request.
Correct.
And I just want to throw this out there because we are greatly reducing the amount of target going to the departments, the discretionary requests are probably going to be significant. So I'm just throwing that out there, just so we're all on the same page.
And they'll
And
need
we
to
may be-
prioritize.
Right.
Yep.
And we may be able to identify some of those through the savings
Yep.
of those other items that you can use to fund some of the discretionary.
And/or revenue enhancements that come along as we get further through the year.
Just on one more, not to belabor the point, but if we could shift gears back to the personnel, I believe there's a consensus not to move forward with new positions or like part-time to full-time, but reclassification okay, or nothing on any personnel requests.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a comment. On this, on the museum curator, which I do have a letter for all the board members from the museum board, but you're saying that it's an increase of $52,720, is that what you're saying? Because it's not.
Yeah, with the insurance added in, we do the family cheapest plan at the family level for insurance customarily, and so that is the total cost.
It's about $25,000.
So that's above and that's above what she's making now
Yes.
as
Yes.
the part-time person?
Yeah, because she doesn't have any benefits right now.
Correct, I know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you explain that one more time?
So when we budget for a new position, a new full-time position, or budget from a transition from a part-time to a full-time, we obviously have to add in the benefits as part of the cost of transitioning that position from part-time to full-time. So when we calculate the cost of that request, the $52,000, that includes insurance.
Okay,
Her
so
health,
that's just
dental,
proposed.
vision.
That's not approved.
That's just a proposed, right.
Okay.
Right.
And-
so
and
then
that will
a
become dis-
Classification from HR generalist to assistant HR director.
That's truly just salary because she already gets her benefits. So there's
Okay,
no
and
increase.
is that a new assistant?
No, that would be a
That would
reclass
be
of an existing
reclass of
position.
existing position.
And those,
We're not adding anything.
So we're going to have two, with
Nope.
this, we would have two assistant HR directors?
No,
We
no,
we
no.
only
We'd
have one.
An
We
HR
don't have
director
one
and
right now.
assistant director. We would no longer have the HR generalist. Same department headcount would stay neutral.
and those are going to be part of the discretionary discussion, right?
I'm
If-
assuming
well,
that,
that was one of the things that I was asking with the
Yeah.
reclassifications of those. Did we want to just add them all as discretionary or?
so we'll have the
Yes.
departments bring these forward as a discretionary request, whether it's a full-time position or a reclass
Reclassification.
or whatever. Is that the
Yes.
consensus? Okay.
Okay.
It's okay with that?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Dodge.
So, Joe and Anne Marie, my answer is yes, bring them forward that way. But to be blunt, what's the business case for each new head to cut costs or do more things our customers want?
Yeah, and
I'm not gonna let that question go. We keep talking about new revenue. We keep talking about cuts, which is precisely the wrong language to use at this moment when we're nowhere close to being operating at maximum efficiency.
yeah, James, and
And
we,
so I'm sorry, Anne Marie, I apologize, but that this is obviously an important issue for me. What is the business case for every single decision we're making here?
and we have been drilling that into the department directors' heads, that when they bring their budget forward, that they have got to identify operating efficiencies, and if there is an increase in cost, it needs to be extremely justified.
Yes.
So
Okay.
they are very aware of that.
So, thank you. I'd also encourage, you and Joe and all of us, that if a department head comes and says, I don't know where else I'm going to find the proverbial blood from the turnip, what do you think? I'm open for those dialogues. This is a hard problem, and we're not going to get it all done in 2018, but we can't release the pressure on ourselves just yet.
Yeah, I think Sarah and I were kind of whispering to ourselves a little bit here. I think that it's going to be a tough road for the next 6 weeks putting this together with the departments. It is a significant policy change. It's a lot less than we recently or we've in the past distributed. So we'll have to work with them. I also think we may need to have one extra meeting in here, maybe in between our capital meeting and our actual departmental meetings, to bring forth any revenue changes that we've experienced or other things like that, any other savings we've identified. So I think you might want to prepare yourself for an extra meeting, and we might change the format of those departmental hearings also a little bit, because the presentation will have to be a little bit different.
Or you could just add that meeting to the beginning of one of the other
We
meetings?
could.
Like an update?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Since we've already gone through this, maybe it won't
Yep.
be as lengthy.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay, so our next meeting is our capital meeting, and we will go over all of the capital and the revenue related to that. Oh yeah, I missed this one too. So this is just, I know we've been talking for a long time. This is just operating type revenues of different funds that we have, that we estimate. They're all segregated into different funds, not used for general operations. They're used for specific purposes. And this is just to kind of give you an idea of what those were. And then, here we go. So we already talked about the personnel request, and then our next meeting is Monday, September 25th. We'll talk about the CIP, we'll talk about IT projects and vehicle purchases and the revenue related to those.
I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
So the motion has been put as up on the board. Call the roll.
Trustee Fenton.
Aye.
Trustee Carroll.
Aye.
Trustee Dodge.
Aye.
Trustee Guerra.
Aye.
Trustee Rusick.
Aye.
Trustee Calendrello.
Aye.
President Pica.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenton.
move to go into executive session for A, appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performances, or dismissal of specific village employees, B, the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the village, and C, setting a price for sale or lease of village property.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
The motion is put as read. Call the roll.
Trustee Fenton.
Aye.
Trustee Dodge.
Aye.
Trustee Guerra.
Aye.
Trustee Rusick.
Aye.
Trustee Calendrello. Trustee Carroll.
Aye.
President Pica.
Aye. Oh, no. I didn't even hear you. You guys were giggling over there, and I was like, okay.
Did you get what you needed?
Well, I don't know. You know what? I didn't want to.
Do I need to? Yeah.
Are we having fun? How you like my bed? We're having fun.